Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session of We Give Summit. Thank you all so much for joining today. This session will be Organized for Change, Mobilizing Strategies from Young Changemakers. Please note that closed captioning is available and can be enabled at the bottom of your screen should you need it. My name is Melissa Vargas, and I'm a program manager here at Philanthropy Together. Philanthropy Together is a global initiative to grow and strengthen the field of collective giving with programming like We Give Summit. Today, we're really excited to dig into the different organizing strategies and tactics being utilized by a panel of absolutely amazing youth leaders. We hope that this session leaves you feeling inspired and with many fresh perspectives and ideas around organizing in a time where it is very crucial and where youth truly are leading the way. Throughout today's session, please engage with us in the chat and be mindful of our We Give Summit community guidelines. I'll drop them in the chat in a moment. And at the close of the session, we encourage you to share your feedback by answering a quick 2-question poll. Stay with us until the end of the session because we'll be announcing someone from the audience today who will win a book from one of this year's speakers. And with that, I'm happy to introduce today's moderator, youth engagement advocate, Dante Push.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you all may be. Like Melissa said, my name is Dante Plush, and I am a youth engagement specialist based here in New York City. And it is a pleasure to be here today to talk about something that's very dear and close to my heart, which is youth engagement. And yeah, speaking of which, really to get us started and give some context, I wanted to share a few words about youth engagement. So I personally have dedicated my career to youth. At first, it was in the form of being a Title I teacher in the Bronx, standing in a classroom, lecturing kids, determining their intelligence according to their performance on state standardized tests. You guys know the deal. And then one day I discovered the world of youth engagement. I didn't even really know it existed because when I was a youth, no one was really talking about this stuff back in the 2000s, not to age myself. But anyways, but youth engagement, it was really cool. Giving youth the knowledge, the tools, and the skills that they need to make changes in the world that they'd like to see. It was pretty captivating. But that's not what really initially caught my eye about youth engagement as a teacher. It was the fact that youth learn during youth engagement. They show you what they know, they learn in a hands-on way, and they can show you what they know without the pressure of having to do well on a standardized test. Young people are experts if you let them be, and if you let them show you what they're experts in. And youth engagement can be equitable since it relies on what a youth already knows and not what they can get out of some fancy, expensive tutoring. That's just what captured my heart about youth engagement and why I've decided to continue working within the developing field today. There's one thing that I personally hope that you will take away from today's session. It's that youth engagement isn't just telling kids to do community service projects, writing them a check and taking pictures with them. It's about giving them an opportunity to teach us, teach each other, show us and show each other what they know and what they're experts in. It's also a chance for us to learn what they can really use support in and not what we think that they can use support in as adults. It's an opportunity for them to learn the knowledge, the skills that they won't forget as soon as they pass the test. It's a true way to shape the development of our youth and actually set the stage for a brighter future. So that being said, I would now like to introduce you to some of our amazing panelists that we have today for our panel and allow them to talk about the work that they do with youth engagement and specifically how they do it. So first off, I'd like to introduce everyone to our first panelist, Nathan Méténier, who is the Director of Development for the Youth Climate Justice Fund. Please give a warm welcome to Nathan Méténier. All right, well, once Nathan returns, we will bring, oh, Nathan, are you ready?
Yes, hi everyone. Sorry. I am usually based on so-called British Columbia in Canada, but I am currently in Africa, in Ghana. And so there's a little bit of a storm going on. So I hope I'll be staying with you all throughout this session. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am Nathan. I am 24 years old in years.
So Nathan, we're having some technical difficulties here. I will give you a moment to figure out the audio here. In the meantime, we have some other wonderful panelists that we want to introduce to our audience as well. Next up, someone who I personally have had the pleasure of working with, a young lady named Lena Ford, who is the co-founder of the Kinship Family Initiative. Howdy, Lena. Please tell us, or the audience, right, about yourself and, just introduce us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lena Ford. I'm 14 and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm an author, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. I am the co-founder of Kinship Family Initiative that I started when I was 12 years old, dedicated to helping families in kinship care or an adult relative raising a child relative that is not biologically their own. I got into this at the age of 7 when I started my first initiative called Arting for You, where I collect and donate art supplies to kids in foster homes and shelters.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And how did you get involved in that work, especially at such a young age?
So I always used to watch the news when I was really little, and there was a lot of negativity. And so I wanted to bring positivity, and I knew a way I can do that is by helping those who are homeless or in shelters. And personally, my mom, she was raised in kinship care. So I knew if my great grandmother didn't take her in, she could have possibly ended up in foster care. And that impacted us personally. And so I wanted to help those.
So you found youth engagement as a way to kind of cope with circumstances in the world, right? Like overwhelming negativity, what life could have been. And you said, I'm going to take control of this. And it's through service of others. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Very inspiring. It's almost like saying that, like, youth engagement or doing community service or whatnot, it doesn't necessarily have to be about helping others. There can be byproducts of shaping your own life and mental health that come from it as well.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Lena, for sharing. We also have the very, very, very tremendous, fantastic, such good energy, Monica Sibri here with us today. Monica is an Ignite alumni, but also works with the IncludUS Fund. Please give a warm welcome to Monica Sibri. Welcome. Thank you, Monica, for being here with us.
Dante, thank you so much. And hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Buenas tardes, buenos días, buenas noches. I'm not sure where everybody's joining us. Really, really excited to be here and share a space with voices of community members who are taking the initiative to support youth and young development. I am the product of what it looks like when you invest in youth and their engagement and their development. Dante mentioned now, can say I'm a philanthropic advisor and support primarily in democracy, politics, women's rights, immigrant justice work, and civic leadership programs. But that comes from my experience in the movement. So to answer your question, Dante, and really give people an idea or a glance of where I come from, I was the people that were trying to help here when I was 16. So what really got me into this path of organizing and really building in the social justice movement that is way bigger than all of us. It started when I had to look at my mother in her eyes at the age of 16 and realize that me telling her, hey, I know you brought me here to give me an opportunity, but I'm just learning that I'm not going to be able to go to school because I don't have a social security, or I'm not going to be able to get a job because I don't have a social security. And then falling into this whole new identity of being a dreamer and realizing that in the eyes of your mother at that point, that's all she knew. And so what she knew was the best at that moment. And what I now know wasn't what she was trying to do for me. So it really took a lot to the point of Lena really going back and realizing, oh, now this is where I had to step in and take on the leadership. What my mother saw as a benefit was not necessarily what she what I was experiencing here. Realizing that that was it, I went ahead and, with my broken English and my accent, I learned a few more words and started learning about city services, went in to help develop more city services throughout New York City. Really took that the path of understanding, okay, wait a minute, you know how these programs work, you have people that clearly need a service, but now who are the people that are creating these programs, these initiatives? And so I started to look at the path of politics and like who gets elected, how do we build that? And then you look at everyone else around, how do we organize around this when, I know my parents couldn't go to a rally or an activity that I was doing, and that was because they had to be focusing and paying the bills. So fast forward, really realized that there is a chain of support and network that we need to build across platforms, across spaces. And fast forward now, it has allowed me to be in philanthropy and continue to do the work that, again, as a product of social services and programs and communities investing in people like me, have allowed me to be where I am today. I'm really looking forward to sharing more about my journey and also how I have personally worked with youth and young engagement that has allowed me to be where I am today. Bringing it back to you.
Monica, thank you so much for sharing that, because it's a similar story to me too. And I actually had a question based off of what you just said. Do you feel that it gives you an advantage, right, coming from that background, having been that young person that people typically look at more as like a recipient of giving and generosity, growing into a capable professional and then paying that forward, using that privilege that you've gained to help other youth? Do you feel like that gives you an advantage over someone who just kind of, had a nice upbringing and just really want to do good in the world anyways?
Dante, I don't know if I'm going to make people cry here or give them a glimpse of what it is to do this work to the country. I think it actually was a burden at the beginning. I've gotten to a point where I value that knowledge and experience, but I think it was a burden because I now know what it is to be in those spaces. And so I now know to do better. And I'm only one person. And so that's where this whole space of being engaged also comes into. Now that we know better, do we do better? But do we have the capacity to do better? And so that's where my focus for the past 10 years has been building networks. You're not alone. You don't have to do it alone. And how do you share your knowledge to be able to bring people into the space? And Dante, we have to acknowledge that everyone that comes into this space, whether they've experienced it themselves or they are joining later in the path of this journey, they're doing it because now they know better. And so how do we now welcome them to the space to continue growing that movement that we know didn't start with me when I share my story? It's not going to start with a person that comes in later or the new Gen Zers are advocating about this. This is about continuing building and making sure that that movement that we're advocating for is inclusive of everybody's voices.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for just building on that. Very powerful, Monica. And circling back to Nathan Méténier, we are back and we are not going to have technical difficulties slow us down. I would love to hear, Nathan, about what you do and how you got into this type of work.
Take number 2. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. We'll see how it goes. Otherwise, I will turn off my camera because I feel I was already starting to lose you all. I'm sorry. I'm Nathan. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I have been a climate justice and queer activist for the past 10 years. I'm 24 years old today. And most of my organizing has happened in Europe, supporting the young people organizing in Brussels, Belgium during the European Green Deal, and then working with different communities all around Europe. And in 2020, I became one of the youth advisors to the UN Secretary General, advising him on climate, the environment, and at the time, obviously, what we were calling the campaign around Build Back Better. Not sure this really worked well. And all throughout my organizing, I've always ended up being the one fundraising. And it took me a while to understand why I was always ending up being the one asking for money. And I realized later that it was because I was at peace with my trauma and my own relationship with money from my upbringing, right? And so I've really sort of used this sort of relationship and this understanding to grow a much more healthy relationship that I hope I'll be able to share. And so when we were youth advisors, we would talk to, young people organizing on ocean conservation, biodiversity conservation, social justice, queer rights, human rights, children rights, and so on. And the lack of funding would come up again and again. And so with various different communities, young people, young organizers, organizations that have been here for a while, we decided to set up our own fund, a fund that would be movement-led, movement informed, youth led, and that would fundraise to philanthropic organization and redistribute it, right? So we don't think of ourselves so much as an intermediary, but I think one of the closest word that the Western world has would be probably being a movement informed, movement led intermediary. And also very recently we did a study that sort of looked at how much funding goes to youth organizing on climate and environmental issues. And it's really interesting because climate and environmental philanthropy always pride itself to support young people and put pictures of, the Fridays for Future movements, if some of you remember those, and the movement of Greta Thunberg. But then we did a study and realized that only 0.76% of all climate and environmental philanthropy was going to youth movements. And so all of this sort of led me to being one of the people leading and supporting the facilitation of the fund. I'm the development director, and I support our work on development and donor influencing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nathan, for sharing. And I had a question based on something that you said. I want to focus in a little more on. You and your organization decided that you wanted to highlight youth-led work. What made you want to take that risk? Was there any anxiety around oh gosh, we might be throwing money at young people to do grassroots organizing? Is there fear involved in that at all? And if so, how did you move past it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think we come from a place where a lot of the organizing on climate and environment in the past 5 years was supported by very big organizations that you might know of, right? Oxfam, Greenpeace, in the US 350.org, and a couple of additional funds. And when we started talking to the source of the funding, so talking with very large foundations, in the US or also in Europe, we realized that most of them were actually supporting youth work, but they were funding adult-led organizations, very often based in the global north, to then support as an intermediary young organizers, very often in the global south. And we felt that that wasn't right, that even though there is a need probably for intermediary, and one of the reasons, and I think you touched upon it, is that often funders think that this type of work is very risky. I think partly because they don't understand the value. I think partly also because youth organizing is hard. And for example, we lack support for transition. I'm sure all of you can relate to that. The moment you transition from an organization, usually you have no support, no best practices on how to retain the organizational support. And often organizations are sometimes set up by a few individuals. And then when they leave, you really lack the relationship, the history of the organization. And for all those reasons, we felt that we needed to have a youth-led fund that would not only support with participative grant making, and therefore make sure that young leaders are the one making the decision on where the money goes. And to me, to be honest, it's the most strategic choice to do, because I don't understand how someone sitting in New York can make decision on where to fund in Sub-Saharan Africa, especially on where it has the most impact. I think it's the young leaders over there who know what's best, and who are the young leaders who are kind, compassionate, egoless, and also supporting with youth-to-youth capacity development, which is a really important part of our work, making sure that giving 10K or 20K or 30K is great, but then also providing support on how creating your content, how to manage your volunteers, how to do fiscal sponsorship, and we're increasing our work in doing that, and also of course doing donor influencing, right? And so being in this spaces, the We Give Summit, but also being in other spaces and explaining to donors that there are a lot of youth-led funds out there, like Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, or the Foundation for Environmental Stewardship in Canada, that are doing very serious, moving huge amount of money. Frida is a $10 million fund annually, and that needs to be celebrated and supported. And I think that is something that really excites me and made me really happy about how the sector is shifting power and changing, even though it's not enough. And I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, change is incremental, but I think you touched on something that I also really appreciate. There is an effort to decentralize philanthropy going on, maybe not as quickly as you'd want to, but the fact that there are funds like the ones that you listed who are like, we're ready to take the risk and, assume that people who live in Africa know better about how to grassroots organize to deal with issues there than me in New York City. Right. So we're seeing more money going to youth, towards marginalized groups. And it's just an overall decentralizing of philanthropy that I hope continues. And I think you highlighted that. So thank you for sharing that. Well, audience, you think you're inspired now. You have no idea. We may have talked to our panelists about what they do, but now it is time to talk about how they do it. So I'm going to ask my panelists, and this will be more, or I guess, less structured, but what are 2 to 3 different types of strategies, specific strategies, that you've utilized throughout your organizing journey? And then what have some of the outcomes of those strategies been? It's a long question. Don't feel bad for having to ask me to repeat it when it's your turn to speak. But again, I'd love for each of you to touch on what are 2 to 3 specific, powerful strategies that you've utilized through your organizing journey, and what have some of the outcomes from those specific strategies been? Who would like to start?
I can start. So for me, specific strategies that I've used are collabs. Since I'm a nonprofit, collabing with other nonprofits with same or similar missions to me help. I also collab with a local bookstore in my area to host free literacy workshops for kids. So I think collabs are important. Another thing are mentors like Dante, who is my mentor as well, and many of my other mentors all helped me where I am today. So I definitely would say mentors as well.
And so, Lena, to build more on like your partnerships, right? Because we mentioned collabs and partnerships. How do you convince someone to work with a young lady, right, who is granted, a high level up person within her own organization, but as Nathan kind of touched on earlier, there is sometimes some risk involved in people's minds with working with someone of your age. So how did you circumvent that? How did you get past that anyways to get this work done?
For me, since I'm kind of the face of the nonprofit, it's sometimes easier reaching out to people myself. If that doesn't work, then, my mom will help. She'll be like, hey, we founded a nonprofit. This is my daughter's work. And normally people would like to talk with us then. A lot of things that we do collab with are drives. So we need volunteers for that. A lot of people think that I'm a volunteer and not really running it, but it's okay because I just let them know, like, I'm running it. This is kind of what we're doing. So
You have a very calm reaction to that. I'd be like, volunteer, excuse me, I'm the CEO. Fantastic. So like you also mentioned mentors as well, Lena. How do mentors specifically help? And have there been any instances in which like mentors have stepped on your toes?
So like I said, I collab with a local bookstore. She's my mentor. So I also have a business. So she's helped me learn how to run my business and do all of that stuff, nonprofit work. She's helped me either find grants for that, find people to collab with. So that's how they help. Stepping on my toes, I will say sometimes when I come up with an idea and I need help with it and I reach out to them, sometimes they respond and then they don't respond anymore. So it's really weird sometimes, but it's okay. You either can find someone else to help you or look up another way to do the idea. Because I think getting help is great, but sometimes with your own ideas, you can try to figure it out as well.
I love that. All right. we have two other panelists who can share some strategies as well. What are 2 to 3 specific, powerful strategies that you have utilized throughout your organizing journey? And what have some of the outcomes of those strategies been? Monica, Nathan?
As I saw Nathan's hand. Thank you for that question. For me, because of where I started, and I think this is for anybody that's an immigrant listening to this, I felt like it's immigrant trauma and just like an action based out of there, but data. I needed to make sure people can believe what I was talking about. People could things that will help me validate what I was saying. Now at this point in my life, I don't really need it. I think people are able to I think they trust me now more and not proven with my work, but data is very, very important. I think this is both for the young and youth organizer that's starting to the person who's in philanthropy and trying to figure out how to create services, programs, and initiatives, right? Like, for example, right now, there's 8 million youth that are aging in the electorate for 2024. I primarily serve within the United States. Exactly. And 45% of them, of the new 40 million Gen Zers are eligible to vote in this election too. But for me, my number where I've always targeted my audience is 8 million of them are Latino voters. And it's like the past years, the civic engagement work that I've been doing is like, how do I now make sure that those programs and initiatives are built around that data, those numbers, and where are they located? So data was very, very important. It's very important as you develop programs as well as just working with people. The other one's is storytelling. I don't think you can change people's minds, and my record and my work has shown that as much as I can come in with data and numbers and show the impact, the storytelling aspect of it is what really buys into the final picture of what we're trying to do. I give you an example. Right now, aside of all the projects that we've been working with IncludUS Fund, as well as the other initiatives that we have primarily within civic engagement, probably some of you have seen that there's been an increase of migration into the United States. I was born in Ecuador, raised in New York City. So there's been a growing population of the Ecuadorian community. And for me, in order to be able to tell the story, people know the data, you see them. There's clearly a need, but for me, the storytelling aspect of it is what matters. So I recently launched a program with a couple of former volunteers and just community members and social workers to build the story from a point that it's not my story, not what I experienced, not what people that have gone through this process have experienced, but allow them to share the story the way they want. So these are mothers who have been selling candy with their children in the New York City subway, which was one of the things that has sort of created a lot of attention because you've never seen it in New York City. It's not just in New York City now. We've heard cases of places in California and Colorado, most recently even in Washington, D.C. And so again, who am I to go and tell them this is not something you should be doing? This is not something that, you should have your kids on the subway. We don't know what the circumstances were, why they were doing it. And so what we did was we launched the program. We had the data, how many of them were doing this, where they were, and then we went for the storytelling aspect of it. So ask them, how is it that they come out to this decision? And we discovered that it's not that they want to have their kids with them selling candy in the subway when it's dangerous. It's because they cannot leave them at the shelters where they are. They cannot leave them at home by themselves because they just came with a kid for the first time and they have no community or network. And so it was really allowing us to build the story through them. And for me, that I've seen sort of build a bigger impact of how we do work. Storytelling, data, 2 big points that can help us, especially if you're trying to advocate for money or trying to get an initiative off the ground, you go and put it together and share it. And then for program officers or foundations or just philanthropic spaces that want to contribute to this, you have exactly what you need, which unfortunately, we can go and dive more into what the space of philanthropy looks like in terms of data, what they request, what grant proposals look like, and all of that. But this is an opportunity where you, I think, can capture all of it and still stay true to who you are in terms of building the programs and initiatives that are more community driven than just asking for money or trying to meet the requirements of a grant.
Amazing. And Monica, I like that you brought up for your strategies like data centered approaches, but then also storytelling, because maybe this rings true for the people who you like not work for, but you're looking to advocate for, right? I feel like a lot of times data may not tell the full story. Like I know when I was teaching, data would say, oh, this school's test scores are horrible. But then the data is also not saying, well, there's chronic absence in school. A lot of these young people don't eat unless they come to school and get free lunch. And then it's like, how do you expect a child to do well on a state standardized test or in school in general? And, why aren't we showing this full story and how these things are intersecting with education? So I really like that you brought those two up, because we already know that data can be a powerful tool to prove our point, to get funders on board with our projects. But oftentimes data is data and it misses out on that true human story. And then that's where you came in with storytelling, and you're like, storytelling is really important because it gives us an opportunity to fill in those gaps that data is kind of leaving out, to help people really understand and paint a picture of what's actually going on versus just numbers. So kudos to you.
Well, I learned that, and some people may see this. My first civic engagement program was actually under the Bloomberg administration.
Mm.
And so I learned that there were a lot of structures in place. There was a lot of Excel sheets. And so if there is another tactic that I can share, which is something that has kept me alive, and to be very honest, in this space, is a network of support. There is not one person I've touched throughout my career that has touched me in an emotional support, in a volunteer capacity, and mentorship, that I have not kept in touch with, or I know where they are, sort of, because I kept them in an Excel sheet. Happy to share that with anybody that's getting started or wants to build a network. But yeah, I have an Excel sheet with over, I think at this point, close to a couple of thousand emails and the people that I've connected since I was 16 years old.
Yes, which means Lena has a head start here. So just saying, networking, you heard it here from Monica. All right. And last but certainly not least, we want to hear from Nathan. Nathan, what are 2 to 3 strategies that you use to do the work that you do? Specific strategies, and what have the outcomes been of those strategies?
Yeah, there's so many. I'm going to try to summarize a few. First, I was thinking about what it means, right? Like collective giving. And of course it's about money, but it's so much more than this, right? And I was thinking, because we are doing our retreat right now. And so we are with our steering committee here, who are 8 young people, 7 of which women, 3 of them are also Indigenous and Native women. And, looking also at our collective journey, right, from the moment we launched 2 years ago to now, and the power of coming together and pool our resources, our intels, our platforms as well. Some of them are extremely well known, have 100,000 followers, to fundraise. And I think there is a huge power of coming together and collectively giving of your platform, of your work, to create, work on an issue, work on a campaign, and eventually even create a fund, right? And I think that's really what we've done. We came together as different individuals that itself, individually, we could each, fundraise a little bit of money for the work that we do, but together we were able to fundraise millions of dollars, right? And so far we've fundraised $5 million in about a year and a half. And this is, I think, a really great power. So the collective giving as coming together, as sharing, but also the collective giving as being able to bring about that intergenerational dimension. And I am a very big, believer that youth-led fundraising is wonderful, because when you talk to someone, a lot of the people I talk to with people at the fund, they have often the age of our parents, right? And that is such an interesting dynamic of being able to say, I'm asking you to give us resources to keep and to improve the world and keep a sustainable future and a fairer future. And you are the one who can do that. And to Monica's point on mentorship, I think it's been really interesting for me, because most of my activism has been working with policymakers. And so working with policymakers in France, working with policymakers in the UK, at the European Union level, and then at the UN. And of course, also other level of government making. And governments and government representatives are so busy. They don't have time to mentor anyone. But philanthropy is a very specific space where actually people, because it is such a secretive space, I think, and because it is such an accessible space, you actually have a lot of people who are ready to mentor. And that was one of the second learning and second strategy I would love to share, which is around the power of bringing donors together to feel they are in community and they are connected to you. So at the Youth Climate Justice Fund, funders don't have a sit in a board. So they don't make decision on where the funding goes, to which communities, to which strategies. But we are still engaging with them. We are still bringing them in a donor collaborative where they can learn. We do online sessions. We'll also do an annual in-person event every year during the UN General Assembly, where we bring them together to talk about different issues. What does safety and security looks like when doing environmental activism in a specific region? What is just transition for young people, and how do they define just transition for the next 10 years? To really feel that community and feel that connectiveness. And I think what's so interesting is that not only you create stronger relationship, but you also allow them to come in, but under your own criteria, under your own rules. It's still our space and they're still invited only. And that has been for me like one of the biggest learning, and seeing some of those founders becoming our biggest champion and bringing them, bringing us and our work or our grantee partners. We have 40 grantee partners in 24 countries. The steering committee just finalized the participative process that has lasted for the past 4 months to select another 20. And this is also really exciting because these young people are very grassroots, they're very community rooted, and they deserve to have their story being told. To Monica's point about storytelling, which is so important in this. And I'll just share a last point. I really agree also with the networks of support. And I think there is something to be said as well, because we talk so much about capacity development as being such an important angle and pillar of how making sure that movements can thrive. But what I've noticed is often capacity development is provided by people who are in their 40s, 50s, and that's something that our steering committee and our collective always says. It's always people based in the North who are telling us how to do climate communication in our communities. And sometimes it's so local that the tools and the advice that are being given are actually not useful. And I think there's a lot of power of creating youth-to-youth capacity development, because what I've observed in the movement is that most of the people that start having knowledge of how policies get changed or how policymakers get held accountable, they get poached either by governments to work in administration, either by nonprofit sector, either by philanthropy, to be honest. And I think that's also a really interesting thing to see, that a lot of the founders who found us is because we have allies within that came from the movement and found their way in those philanthropic organizations. I'm sure that a lot of people can relate with, because there's wonderful people working in philanthropy all across. And so this essential question of how can we retain our own communities, our own leaders for any kind of work, right? It can be queer-led, it can be indigenous-led, it can be BIPOC-led, or it can be on a specific issue. And I find that really interesting because, if anything, the Youth Climate Justice Fund is also the story of how we retained as much as possible and provided resources is what I know about this region. So yeah, sorry, I probably just jumped a little bit, but those would be 2 or 3 strategies that I think are super interesting and passionating.
Yeah, no, there is no need to apologize. We had like an amazing save right there and just a really good overall answer. And I liked there's a common theme amongst your 3 strategies that you just shared with us. And the theme is reframing your scenario so that the power is kind of in your hands. I feel like initially people think about, oh, I got to impress this funder. I got to invite them out for coffee and then give them a pitch for my project. And I have to blah, blah, blah. But in that whole time, you're putting all the power in the hands of the funder. And I feel like between your distributed like fundraising model that you kind of explained and bringing funders into a community versus kind of trying to get them to, I guess, see the value of your project, it's like reclaiming power and further doing what we were talking about before, like decentralizing the philanthropic sector, right? So kudos to you for that, Nathan. And I think that brings us the perfect transition to our final question for our panel. So I'd like to know from you, Nathan, what does a successful future for youth engagement look like to you? And how can someone in this audience today help you make that future into a reality?
Yeah, I was thinking like, do you want the truth and the radical answer, or do you want the tamed, pragmatic answer? I believe that philanthropy shouldn't exist in the first place, obviously. But obviously, I'm also pragmatic, and I think that philanthropy is here and is here to stay. And I think the most important thing is to explain why intersectionality matters. And a lot of the time at the Youth Climate Justice Fund, we of course have climate in our name, but the justice element comes first, right? And a lot of the work that we support is, of course, like, we have very concrete criteria. They have to hold policymakers accountable to climate and sustainable policies. They have to raise ambition on getting more equity and just policies within all countries at all levels. It can also be at the local level. But the most important criteria is that all those groups need to show how they are making sure. I'm just going to turn off my camera because I see that huge clouds coming. So I want to stay with us as much as possible, with you as much as possible, is to make sure that all the work that they're doing is community rooted, and that ideally is empowering communities that have been historically marginalized again. So our work is to support groups that are either BIPOC-led or queer-led or woman-led or any kind of ethnic groups that, the group can explain why they've been marginalized within their own context. Because we believe that the thing that is truly missing to make any kind of progress, both in social justice, climate justice, environmental justice, is to have the voice of those that haven't been able to say their truth and to say the reality that they hold, may it be ancestral knowledge, may it be, queer rights and so on, to change the narratives around the climate crisis. And so for me, upholding those rights and upholding those voices are so essential. And the way we do it is by directly giving support so that they can do it themselves, right? And not just like writing stories about them or, bringing them on a platform where they can voice their story. We think that eventually they'll be able to do that. And the other thing I'll say is, I think one of the things that I think is shifting is the realization that wealth obviously have been often accumulated on the back of free labor or, of course, really sort of difficult, oppressive systems. And so the importance of participative groundmaking as a decentralization, as you said, but also as just shifting power to give back to those who also haven't been able to have their voice in this issue is passionating. And I think we are starting to see that a little bit. We have in the past 2 years seen 4 of our collective members who've been joining Rockefeller Foundation Advisory Board, the new Patagonia Fund, Home Planet Fund, the Quadrature Climate Foundation, which is a new massive foundation in London. And I think to anyone here, so first to funders, open your board, create a seat, even if you can't in your bylaws, for young people, community-rooted young leaders, because it's not just about young people. It's not the age, the thing is the community-rooted, right? To them, because you will learn so much and you will have much more impactful work at the end of that. And also for all the young people, the young leaders, just like really being curious, like as much as like philanthropy is a secretive space, foundations have websites and there might not be the staff and their pictures, but they are over there. And I think starting looking, being curious, looking where the founders meet is a really, really good way to then start influence and bring your own topics to the agenda. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Awesome. Thank you, Nathan, so much for just kind of that bright future, right, for youth engagement and whatnot. I hear that there's a lot of decentralizing and a lot of intersectional discussion that needs to be had for us to have a bright future here. And I love it. What else? We have 2 more fantastic panelists to hear from. What does a successful future for youth engagement look like to you? And how can someone from the audience help you make that into reality?
For me, it looks like people going to help in their community without being forced to do so. Because I know with high school, sometimes they're forced to have certain community service hours in order to even graduate. So I want people to be able to go out in their community and have fun doing it and not feel forced to do it. One way you can help me is by doing that, going to your community, help out, have fun. Yeah.
I really like that. And I think that that's something that I struggle with too. The future of youth engagement will not be bright if it is all transactional, right? If it's all young people who are doing this for a college application, if it's all corporations doing this for good PR, there needs to be the actual desire to want to do good in the world, and probably also some outcome of like, wow, I helped make change, or I helped improve someone's day. And that makes me feel powerful, not I got something out of this. So I think I share that sentiment with you too, where it's like, we're going to need to see people wanting to do good just to do good and for no other reason for this to be a bright future for this sector. And last but certainly not least, Monica, what does a successful future for youth engagement look like to you? And how can someone from the audience help you make that future into a reality?
Thank you, Dante and Lena, and everybody for what they've shared so far. Listen, this new generation, it's coming through the issues. They're no longer coming through, I don't like this elected official, I don't like what's happening here, or I've directly been impacted by this. They're coming through what the issues are. So environmental justice being one of the top issues right now in discussions within groups of, especially in the community that I work with, Latinos, really being one of the new topics. And so for me, the approach here, especially when it comes to philanthropy, is, and we've addressed this throughout the conversations, like, who are the program officers? Who are the people that are making sure that this money is going into the spaces? And we've seen a lot of people that came out of the movement becoming program officers, serving as in advisory capacities, but it's not enough yet. I think there's still a big gap that we can fulfill. Also, as they become program officers, as movement people become part of now this new structure, they need to stay up to date with what's happening in our communities. I think one thing that we forget is that because we've struggled, we've experienced certain things, we think we know, but there is a whole different story that's happening in our community. So how do we go back and make sure that there's still that connection of that pipeline where we're consistently growing and understanding how our movement is changing and what is now a priority for them? So for me, one of the biggest things that I love to see is, especially in the immigrant justice space, we know that we have a program, for those that are not familiar with U.S. laws and changes, undocumented immigrants, dreamers. In this movement, there was a legislation passed a few years ago about helping them get the status. Now that's no longer the case. Some of them are losing their status. Some of them it's taking long for them to get their status. And some of them have already been in the workforce for so long. So now they have to pause their jobs, their employment opportunities, to be able to figure out what that looks like. And so for me, what I would love to see is, how do we create a space for an expert to become a consultant, part-time program officer at a foundation, or the circles of giving, so that way they can still continue to share what they know and have opportunities to still work. That is a huge population that's losing opportunities. They need to now think strategically outside of the box. And also it gives an opportunity for foundations and partners who've kept people in there for many, many years, are not necessarily familiar with the latest structures and developments in our community, to be able to build together and collaboratively. Again, if we say we're trying to, in philanthropy, we say we're trying to support our community, how are we really opening that space to ensure that our community is at the table making those decisions as well? So that would be my biggest thing. So it's not necessarily decentralized in philanthropy, but it's more making it equitable and ensuring that there are voices of people that are still directly connected to the movement as part of the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. So what I hear from this is getting more people into those positions of power, those program manager positions, and also not even just depending on those. Let's create our own table too, and do it in the way that we know how, so we're not depending on other people. Is that kind of what I'm picking up from? That sounds like a bright future to me. And that actually brings us to the end of our panel. So this has been fantastic. It's been a pleasure for me to moderate this. Thank you so much for this just really engaging conversation about youth engagement and its future, with actual specific detailed strategies, not buzzwords, not stuff we expect to hear, actual real life journeys and strategies and calls to action. Thank you so much to my panelists, Nathan, Monica, and Lena, for a great conversation. My name has been Dante Plush. It has been a pleasure moderating this panel for the Week of Summit, and I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Dante. And thank you so much, Lena, Monica, and Nathan. That was a really inspiring, powerful conversation, and we appreciate each and every one of you. You'll see that a poll just popped up. Before you hop off the Zoom, take a second to fill that out for us. The session was recorded and you'll be able to find it on Whova afterwards. I want to take a moment to announce today's this session's raffle winner, which is Guff Van Voren. Congratulations, Guff. Let us know which book you'd like and we'll get that sent to you. Thank you everyone again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next session at the top of the hour for Map Your Ties, How to Tap into Your Community at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And just so everyone knows, make sure that you go back into Whova and go to the next session. So we'll be closing this Zoom room. So yeah, thank you all so much. See you in the next session.